Good morning, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for being a part of our first webinar in the Success by 6 and Help Winter webinar series. We're really pleased that as many of you are as interested as you are. The series has been designed to move human development research conducted by HELP into action across communities in the province. First step in the series is what's the difference? Using critical difference to understand EDI data. My name is Amy, and I am organizing this event and will be working on the back end. So if you have any questions or issues with any of the technology, it will be Amy who is answering them. Hopefully you can see your GoToMeeting window. Through that, you have an audio button that will help you determine your sound issues. If you continue to have any sound issues, please switch from mic and speakers to telephone, and the telephone button will then provide you with a call-in number. Also troubleshooting your own speaker system just to make sure that everything is up and running on that end. The other piece of housekeeping is there's a questions tab and button. Feel free to raise your hand or ask a question directly into the box, and we will do our best to answer it. Joseph Dunn and Barry and Jay are all here with me right now, and I'll do a quick introduction and then we'll get going. So Barry is a research methodologist here at HELP, and he will kick things off with a little bit of a background about the critical difference, what it is, why it's important. Jay will then walk through some of the tools that are being used and walk everyone through some of our online tools that we've developed to help you calculate critical difference. And Joseph is here. We're really pleased that he's here to provide some background on how critical difference can be used effectively within communities, locally, regionally. Joseph is here to answer questions as they come up, and so we're going to try and make this as fluid and seamless as possible. So we're looking forward to a really, really strong hour. I'm going to send Barry on over to the computer, and we're going to get things going. Thank you.
Well, good morning, everybody. It's really good to be here and have such a great crowd of about 100 people taking part in this webinar. And I want you to be as free as possible to ask your questions, make sure that what we're doing today is understandable to you, and you leave the whole process knowing a lot more about change over time and how it's used. So I think I'll just get started here. Oops. To go. Okay. Is that going to work now? I don't see anything on the. Sorry. Okay. Right. Thanks. Okay. So I think the idea that I have is that there's some people who are on the other side of the ether here who know quite a bit about change over time, and others who, for whom it's something relatively new. I'm not really quite sure where everybody's at, but hopefully we're going to try to provide all the basics plus a little attempt to go a little deeper in terms of understanding what change over time is all about, and also a lot easier in the sense that we have these new tools that will make it easier for everybody to work with the data. Okay, so just to acknowledge our change over time team, not everybody on the team is here today. Jay and I are here, but the whole methodology around change over time was developed with two other people at UBC here, Martin Goon and Bruno Zumbo. I just wanted to acknowledge them. Okay. Now before I actually get started on change over time, I want to ask you a question. This is a chance for you to interact with me. How many people here would like me to go through some of the basics about what the EDI means? If you do want me to do that, could you just type in, yes, raise your hand?
Yeah, raise your hand.
Yeah, raise your hand. And if enough people would like me to do that, then I'll provide more information about the EDI and what vulnerability rates are and so on. So if you just take a second and do that.
And while we're waiting for that, Barry, just another comment for the people out there participating. I think it would be helpful if, as you have questions and you're hearing Barry and Jay discuss the material, just send those questions in, and whenever it's convenient, I'll share those, and we'll have a bit of a discussion, keeping in mind that we want to be surrounding the research with the practical application of it in community. So if you're thinking about how you're planning and your coordination working with this research and these tools in your communities, that's the kind of approach and angle we want to focus on.
So 15? Okay, 15 people have asked for a bit of a primer on the EDI, so I'll just run through this very quickly. The EDI is a measure of children's developmental health that we do in British Columbia. Every 2 or 3 years, we cover the whole province, essentially, and it's really what happens is there's a checklist of 103 items that the teachers fill out on their kindergarten children around February. It'd be like next month, where those scores would be measured on the children. We would gather those all together and have a measure for the whole province of where children are in terms of developmental health. And there are 5 different areas of developmental health that we're looking at here. Have them on the screen here: physical health and well-being, social competence, emotional maturity, language and cognitive development, and communication skills and general knowledge. So there's a scale score on each of those 5. And we are also interested in whether children, how they're doing overall. And how we do measure those things is in terms of vulnerability. So let me just go through some of the questions here for each of these 5 scales. Just give you a sense. Physical health and well-being, we have things around fine and gross motor development, things around preparedness for school, washroom independence. There's 13 questions actually altogether in physical health and well-being, covering 3 main areas. Social competence, there's 4 main areas that go through how kind of cooperative and respectful children are, their amount of self-control, and how well they act in terms of being socially appropriate within the school behaviors and in the school environment. Emotional maturity, which is somewhat related, has 4 components. One has to do with how much helping behavior children show, their levels of aggression, fear and anxiety, things like that. So it's more about the informal peer-to-peer interaction that's measured for emotional maturity. Language and cognitive development looks mostly at things relating to early literacy and numeracy, how well kids are doing, as well as their interest in those kinds of things. And finally, communication skills is a short scale that looks mostly at the children's ability to communicate with each other and to participate actively in their kind of storytelling and so on. So we get scores on all of those things for the children, and what we do for each of the 5 is we determine which children are vulnerable on that scale, on each of those scales, and also how many children are vulnerable on one or more of those scales. And the main thing to really kind of get at here is that we don't actually ever use that information about individual children's vulnerability. We aggregate that up so that we look at the vulnerability rates, either for a neighborhood, of which we have about 300 in BC, or at the level of the school district. Those are the 2 that we mostly look at. And so we're interested here in vulnerability rates, and for what we're doing today is really understanding about how vulnerability rates change over time, and how to know whether a change over time is large enough to be something that we should pay attention to. So for today, I have a few things I want to cover. One is about thinking about change over time, introducing the idea of a critical difference, and just giving you a really brief summary of how we calculate a critical difference for those methodologists in the audience. Show our original tables of critical differences that we created and have now improved upon. With you'll see that Jay is going to show some of our new tools. But those tables do exist in our community reports, so people still need to know how to use those tables. And then just a little bit of a little tiny baby stats lesson on why critical differences get smaller as the number of children in a location gets bigger. After that, Jay will show you, do a demo of some of our online tools, and then we'll take some questions.
And just to jump in there, Barry, for those who have been wondering, this presentation, this webinar will be recorded and posted on the HELP website. So it might be of benefit to go through it with your school district and community partners in the future, just to include them in this knowledge gathering experience, and when you're having these discussions about taking this data and incorporating it into your community early years planning.
Great, thanks, Joseph. Okay, so everyone ready? Okay, so thinking about change over time. And here what we mean mostly by that is about whether there's been an increase or a decrease in the rate of vulnerability in one place. Usually we're thinking in terms of neighborhood. As you recall, I said there's about 300 in the province, or by school district, of which there are 59. So change over time in the vulnerability rates from one time to another. We've already gone through 5 different waves of EDI data collection, so 4 of which we actually still use, because at the very first one, the instrument changed. But for the last 4 waves, we can think about how vulnerability has changed, for instance, in one neighborhood from one time to the other, and see whether that change is something that's worth talking about. This idea of changing vulnerability can be applied to any of the scales, physical, social, emotional, and so on, or to our overall measure of vulnerability, which is vulnerability on one or more scales, on any one of the scales or more. You may know from in the province that vulnerability on one or more scales tends to be around 30%, and over time it's stayed around 30, but lately has crept up a bit higher than 30% in the most recent wave. That's for the whole province, and of course some neighborhoods are going up and down, and we're interested in that idea of change over time and whether it's real. So why do we talk about meaningful change? Well, we're interested in whether we're moving in the right direction, I guess, is the main question. The main answer, I should say. In a perfect world, it would be really easy to understand meaningful change, because say, if you think of a child, think of all the children in the province on the day that they're being measured in kindergarten on the EDI. They're being measured on the EDI on all these 5 different scales, but we could measure other things about them too, their height, their weight, whatever. In a perfect world, you would be able to measure, for instance, all these things, and if you saw a change from where they were before, you would say that is a real change. But for the EDI, in the EDI, we have 2 aspects of how vulnerability rates change over time. There's the actual change in the vulnerability rate, and then there's some error due to measurement. Unfortunately, unlike, for instance, weighing a child, where you would always get the same measure all the time, we're measuring things that are a lot more difficult to measure. Social competence, language and cognitive development, and so on. And we have items that we do our best job to do that, but there will always be some errors in terms of giving a score to a child on each of those things. We think we have a pretty good measure, and we know it works very well in terms of predicting future success. But when you're measuring things like those things, or even things that you might have known about like IQ and so on, it's not the same thing as measuring weight or height. There's more error involved. Also, this is something where teachers are involved with giving the scores. And they're all trained to use the EDI as consistently as possible, but every child's score has a little component to it where it reflects something about the teacher. Over the whole province, some teachers are, a little more lenient in terms of how they score things. Others are more strict about how they score things. Some teachers are more consistent as they're scoring across all the questions on the EDI. Others are less consistent. And to that extent, there's some error that creeps in. And whenever you end up with a score for a child, it reflects their actual who they are in terms of all of these aspects of development, plus some uncertainty around this error. And so in reality, meaningful change has to kind of figure out how much of that error is possibly there. So we know that if we have a big enough change, we know it's more than what the error probably is. We're confident that it's actually something that did change over time and not something about some random error of measurement. Here's the way to think about it. First thing to try to figure out is if, for instance, in your school district or your neighborhood, there's been a change in vulnerability from one time to the next. Let's do a test, which we call our critical difference test, to see whether we can only attribute that to something about some random error, or whether it's big enough that we think that there's something really there, a real change. Once we have a real change, then we can start talking about what it really means. Okay, as you'll see as we go through here, sometimes a relatively small amount of change can be significant, and sometimes you need a much larger change, and that depends a lot on how many children you're talking about. So I'll get into this more as we go through. So a critical difference is the amount of change over time for one location, which is the way I've been talking about it. We can also look at it as the difference between two locations at one time that's large enough to start having a conversation about. In other words, we're doing a test to see whether the difference that we see is large enough to know that it's not just something about the error that's built into the test. It's something beyond that. There has been a real change, and try to understand that in the local context. It could be the local context about what you've done in your neighborhoods or school districts from one time to the next. It could be the local context about some socioeconomic changes that have happened in the neighborhood. It could be something about who the teachers are. It could be a whole bunch of different things.
And just to give perhaps a more particular understanding of what those contexts are, I'm sure many of you out there who are involved in the process of bringing this forward in your communities have brought the EDI material to your community leaders or perhaps the municipal council to talk about how those rates of vulnerability have changed. And often there is perhaps some questions, some skeptitude about vulnerabilities increasing when people see their neighborhoods, perhaps affluence improving. So I guess what we're talking about is being able to stand behind that these differences are not some anomaly or that there is a real credibility to what that change is happening. So it's particularly with those stakeholders that are looking to see the larger perspective of change.
Right, and the key to this definition here is a difference that's large enough to start having a conversation about. So once you've established that there has been a critical difference, that's where the conversation starts. What does it mean in your local context? And trying to make sense of that so that you can, for instance, capture some reductions in vulnerability or deal with unexpected increases. Yeah. Okay. So just one really quick slide here about how we did it. You know, I'm a methodologist by training, and so for those of you out there who like methodology, we basically use the real EDI data to actually simulate the process of teachers assigning scores to children, the same way they do in real life. And you know, all of the scale items and the scales have relationships with each other, which we captured in our simulations, along with some random processes, and took into account things that can make a difference in terms of how much uncertainty there is. Things like making teachers more or less consistent, or strict or lenient, looking at how there are slight differences from one wave to another, and most of all, neighborhood size, seeing how the critical difference changes as you go from small to larger neighborhood sizes. And you'll see shortly that that's one of the main aspects of uncertainty. So from our simulations, we calculated some vulnerability rates very similar to what we have in real life because we were using real data, but it also allowed us to look at the uncertainty or the error around those rates, which allows us to look at critical differences. And what we came up with was this table. This is a table that appears in all of the community reports, and it was based on our simulations. And basically, it only applies to one sort of vulnerability, and that's vulnerability on one or more scales. And this is one of the exciting things about today is that some people are interested in not just one or more scales, because it could be any scale, but they're interested in actual individual scales. We have analyses for individual scales, but if we put all 5 scales plus this one on every community report, it would be a very long thing. So we come up with a better way of looking at it, which I'm going to tell you about, and Jay is going to show you. This allows us, this is the result of our simulation. It really allows us to move from where we were originally in most local contexts was, well, is 5 points difference enough to say that it's meaningful? That's kind of like the rule of thumb that we used to use. And now we see that from looking at the table that it actually isn't a 5-point change that's necessarily meaningful. It might be meaningful if you have a lot of children in your neighborhood or school district, but it would be less meaningful if you're in a smaller place. And the average neighborhood size in BC is a little under 100 children, I believe. So we're talking more like around 7, 8, 9% of a change before, in most places, before you would start to talk about something that we think is real as opposed to some random fluctuation around how the EDI is measured. Again, we can apply this to neighborhood or school district or province, whatever we want to. The numbers stay the same. This is just the table for vulnerability on one or more scales. And where do we get the numbers on those things? Well, if you go to the community reports, you can get the vulnerability rates for all of the scales, for all of the waves, just by going online to the help website. The good thing is that you don't have to do this yourself anymore, because there's actually going to be a calculator you're going to see that does this for you. This is just an example from the Langley School District, but you can see it for your own area of the province for all the waves in all the neighborhoods. So how do you use the table? Here's an example of the same table, and I've done a comparison of one neighborhood, Smithers-Telkwa, over 2 waves, and unfortunately for me, I can't see the whole thing here. Can you help me here, Jay? Okay, I'll just move it over. Okay, great. So you see that the number of children in the 2 waves was quite different. The way to calculate using the table whether there's been a significant difference or not is to look at what the critical difference is for each of the waves, depending on the size of the number of children. So in wave 2 for Smithers-Telkwa, there were 68 children measured. That means if you look at the table, that's a critical difference of 10. In wave 4, there were 125 children measured, and that corresponds to 7 on the critical difference table. You take the average of those two, 10 and 7, which is 8.5, and you ask the question, was the change over time bigger or than 8.5? And indeed, it was not. It only changed by 7%, which is smaller than 8.5. And so we would say, in this case, that Smithers-Telkwa, even though their vulnerability rate went up by 7 percentage points, we are not confident that that is a real difference from from wave 2 to wave 4. One more example of looking in one place over time, Langford, which is a community just west of Victoria. They had the 64 and 63 in the 2 waves, which corresponds to a critical difference of 10 at each time. So you need a difference of 10 or of more than 10 points to say that there has been a real difference, and then decide what that means. And in fact, it's actually went down in reality from 28% to 16%, which is 12 points. And so we would say in this case that there was a significant difference between wave 2 and wave 4 in Langford. And the last one just shows that you can actually use this for looking at one wave and comparing 2 different places. And here the difference was only 4%, and whereas the critical difference would be 10. So here there was no difference between Langford and Smithers on wave 2.
So Barry, bearing in mind that people on participating today, many are from small communities, rural communities across the province, and I think a lot of the questions are, if that's the case, I guess it would have to be a big change if we're talking about a small population in a small community for it to be something of significant to make decisions about or or for it to be meaningful.
That's right, and I guess I could say that's unfortunately right, although we've tried to help out with that by redoing our neighborhoods 2 or 3 years ago, where really the smallest sized neighborhoods are bigger than these ones were back then, and so they tend to be 100 or bigger. So so it gives more power essentially to try to find significant differences in vulnerability rates over time. But you're right, the smaller communities are in a different boat than the larger communities are, because they have to see a bigger change. Their scores are going to bounce around more, and so they need a bigger change. One way of doing that, which we actually are doing in the province now, is that we're, for any particular wave, we're in wave 6 right now, we're going to the smaller communities every year, as opposed to the larger communities where we're going only once in 3 years. And the reason we're doing that is so that we get these numbers up for the small communities. As long as the numbers are high enough, it doesn't matter if it's children over 3 different school years or 2 different school years, you still use the table the same way. And our waves are all either 2 or 3 years.
So just to clarify, that means you could use the numbers over several years and combine them, and that gives you the higher number to work with.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Things are more stable if you look at small communities over a longer time period. Plus, we've made the neighborhood sizes bigger, which also helps. But the larger communities, it will always be easier to find a significant difference. What's that?
A few questions.
Oh, okay.
So our first question is whether in the Smithers example, are you referring to the wave 4 number of children in the location size area of the table?
Yeah, it's the same. It's the same place. Yeah. For some reason, we had more children in wave 4 than we had in wave 2.
I think that might be due to how many times we went back to collect data in Smithers in wave 4. So it's an example of a place where we maybe only collected it once within 3 years, initially in wave 2. But as we moved through time, we realized it was quite small, and so we actually started sampling more years so we could bring the numbers up, so we could have kind of a lower critical difference value.
Right. So just to clarify, so waves and years of doing the evaluation are different.
Yes. Yeah.
Right, but we're trying to make it easier for places to be able to to find critical differences where they are there. Other questions? The numbers vary often. That one? Often. How do the numbers vary on or off reserve? Are there differences? I really would like to bring that Aboriginal data to my communities and to be able to move forward in some of our nations. Now, I do believe that we're having another webinar specifically about the Aboriginal children in the province and their EDI results sometime this winter.
Yeah, I think so. This particular question that came forward was around Aboriginal EDI data on and off reserve, but I think what it comes down to is, once again, that the numbers have to be there to warrant a real consideration, and if the numbers aren't high enough or can't be separated out in many cases, then it's not really something that we can make a claim about that change that's happened. So,
and that webinar will be late February on the Aboriginal data.
Right. And I will say, I think
on the 26th.
Yeah, I think we have. Speaking of kind of like uncertainty around children's scores, I think there are some parts of the province where we're still struggling to get as much uptake of the EDI as we have in other parts of the province. And I think the Aboriginal on-reserve communities have been ones that we're still don't have as good of a take-up as we do in other parts of the province or in other types of children. And so it has implications for things like critical difference. There we have some sampling problems, not just measurement problems. Okay, and now, is that it for questions?
Yeah.
Okay, here, I need to go, how do I go back? I thought I. Oh.
There.
Oh, okay. I'm
Do you want to go back?
No, no. Oh, is that where I? Yeah, that's where I was. Okay.
Yeah.
Wow, look how far I've gotten already. I just want to give you a sense. What you can see from the table is that the critical difference really gets a lot smaller as the size of number of children goes up. And in fact, you know what? I had another slide here. I thought. Just going to look down here. Okay. Okay. I'm going to actually go to this slide first. This is actually the curve that we got from our simulations for one or more vulnerability on one or more scales, and this is what the table was created from. And just to now I know why I had it later. Okay, so that what we have done recently, and what Jay's going to show you, is that we kind of looked at this and said, oh, it has kind of a nice curve there. And does that curve have kind of is there a way of kind of mathematically describing that curve? And that's what this black line is. This is actually the curve for vulnerability on one or more scales for critical difference, showing the critical difference on the vertical axis and the neighborhood size on the horizontal axis. That has allowed us to create these tools essentially to really help people calculate critical difference for any time point really easily on our online calculators, and to be able to also show multiple scales all in one place. So Jay is going to talk about that, but I do want to just go back here for a second on why do critical differences get smaller as location size increases. This is just something I just do from out of my, I don't know, Don Quixote-esque desire to try to make people understand statistics a bit better about things like the law of large numbers. Essentially, it's because when you have a bigger number of observations of things, the unexpected results get less and less likely. So I was going to give you a couple of quick ideas about that and how that works. I mentioned here flipping a coin. Everyone's flipped a coin. If you flip a coin, let's say flipping a coin, an unusual result would be getting 60% or more heads. If you flip a coin 5 times, that will happen half of the time that you do that. If you flip a coin 10 times, you'll get 60% or more heads, in this case 6, 7, 8, or 9, or 10 heads, only 38% of the time. If you flip 50 coins and ask how often you get 30 or more heads, that only happens 13% of the time. If you flip 100 coins, say, never mind flipping them, put them in a box of 100 coins and just shake it up. How often will you get 60 or more heads? Only 3% of the time. And if you were crazy enough to do that with a box with 1,000 coins in it, and you want to get 600, that's all, or more, just a little bit more than 500, you would think, that would only happen one time in 10 billion times. So the larger the number of observations, the more that things get to be, these unusual results get less and less and less likely. And it's the same with the EDI. Because it's not perfectly measured, every teacher has a chance of misclassifying the child. Some teachers who are really strict will call some kids vulnerable when they really aren't. Some teachers who are having a bad day will give everybody a bad score. Some teachers who see a child acting out the day before will give them an aggression score that they don't deserve. But for every one of those, there's the opposite. And overall, they kind of cancel each other out. And the more observations you have, the more perfectly they cancel each other out. And so the idea of getting the wrong vulnerability rate, or a vulnerability rate where there's a lot of uncertainty around it, gets smaller and smaller and smaller as you have more and more children. And that's the idea. So I think that's my one lesson. Thank you for listening. I'm going to turn this over now to Jay to show you some of our online tools. Oh yeah.
Hello, everyone. So bear with me for a second as we try and switch from PowerPoint, and we have successfully done that. So this is our new tool that we have, and you can find this by going under Research, and then critical difference. And then you can actually click right here to calculator. And you will see actually, and above here we have some more examples walking you through calculating critical difference, and we also have the power curves and the equations included if you would like more detail. So this is actually a lot of the content that Barry has been presenting today is on this page in a great note format if you're looking for some text to go along with today's presentation. So what we have here, Barry was showing you the tables, and that was difficult at times for people to work with, and it was kind of a stepped groupings of critical difference. But as you saw, there's a nice curve there, so we actually have the ability to look at it in a little more of a fine-grained fashion. So to use this calculator, you could use this for any geographic unit, so that could be school districts, health service delivery areas, local health areas, health authorities, the province, what have you, or neighborhoods. And you start out by taking one vulnerability. So my first example, I'm going to do vulnerable at one or more scales. So that's important too. You must select the correct. So if you were looking at physical vulnerability, you would need to click on physical, but we're doing one or more here. And I'm going to look at Southeast Kootenay. So in wave 1, they had 32%. So I enter 32% right here. And in wave 2, they had 24%. And then in the first wave, they had a population of 1,053, and then they had 867.
So Jay, just to remind us, where did you get these numbers? So if I'm in the Southeast Kootenay region, how would I come up? How would I find this if perhaps I'm new to working with the EDI data?
So yes, good question, Joseph. So we could go to the data library here under the Maps and Data tab. I'm not going to click on it at this moment because I'll lose all the numbers I just punched in, but there will be an option to download an Excel table of all the data, and you could also look under our map area here for EDI, and we can look at the provincial maps, which will show you school district level data. Regional is health authority data, and then neighborhood will give you the neighborhood data.
So yeah, I think certainly as you're pointing out there, depending on what your particular what stakeholder group you're working with when you're talking about critical difference and looking at this data will depend how you want to, I guess, look at what particular region or the subject population, as it were. Great, thanks.
No problem. So now I want you to think in your heads, do you think this is a critical difference? We get to play a fun game, and we can kind of guess before. Critical difference, maybe not. And it is a critical decrease in vulnerability. So for this combination of population sizes, as Barry explained, it's important to look at the population size at both times or places. We get a critical difference of 2.2, but we had a change here of 8. So that means we had a critical decrease in vulnerability. So now I'm going to look somewhere else. I'm going to look at NISCA in the same waves 2 to 5, and NISCA went from 30 to 35%. And they had a population of 51 and 72. And this is on one or more scales. So now once again, you guys can play at home, and you can make a prediction if you think that this is a real change. So we have a 5% change, and is this a real change? And the answer, no, it is not. So you'll see down here, it'll state no critically different change. The change here was 5%, and we needed 9.3% change in NISCA to see change.
And so if this is part of a community conversation, I'm sure there would be people around the table who would say, things are changing. There's a vulnerability, there's a different number. How could this not be significant? So how, if I'm the coordinator trying to make sense of this for my community, how do I dissuade them from wanting to act or change their planning or react to that kind of number? What does it mean that it just doesn't matter?
So good question. So the first question, as Barry talked about before, is we need to ask ourselves why we expect a change. Has something happened in the community that we would expect vulnerability to go up or down? Either way, has there been interventions, or have there been other things that would make us think that there would be change? Because in many cases, over several years, we might not see a change. And the other thing, and the other kind of dimension of the EDI is we want to look at the absolute rate of vulnerability. So, we may not be changing from year to year. We might know that the vulnerability is around 30 to 35, but we still might want to act to try and affect change. We still might want to lower that vulnerability. So, even though we might not see change, if we don't have reason to believe that there should be change, that's okay. So, actually in some ways, we're seeing some stability in the measurement here, right, in a sense.
And I guess in the longer scope, this may be part of a trend that eventually we'll see that more significant change revealed in future waves.
Exactly. So, change in communities can take a long time, and so maybe we haven't reached that, and that's part of the importance of what we're doing here at Help with the EDI, is that we are continuing to track communities throughout time. And it's through this kind of longer term tracking that we will be able to see, trends that we may have missed if we weren't really looking at all the time.
And that's important for many communities when they're trying to see, sometimes neighborhood by neighborhood, which neighborhoods to be more focused in terms of interventions and programs and supports. It is certainly important to be able to say, in this neighborhood, the change is critical and measurable and significant, and we should address perhaps more of our attention, or look at resources being located in those neighborhoods rather than other ones that are staying more at the same place in their vulnerability.
And I guess that would highlight too, with smaller neighborhoods, that you're going to need a lot more change to have a critical difference, because you are actually affecting fewer children in that case.
Great, thanks.
So, we have a question, or let's see.
Two questions.
Barry, what do you think?
Which one?
Could it be used in other provinces?
Well, absolutely. In fact, the EDI course was originally developed in Ontario. And if this person's from Ontario, at the Offord Centre, I think they have looked at critical difference. I'm not sure if they are using it in terms of their knowledge translation and reporting as much as we are in British Columbia, but yes, it can be used anywhere. And in fact, in Australia, they actually do the EDI in the whole country every 3 years, and change over time is something that's very important for them to track how well the whole country is doing in terms of reducing vulnerability for children. So it can be used anywhere. And the other one?
Okay, and so now we are going to look at a larger community. This happens to be Surrey from wave 2 to 5. And so Surrey is much larger than the previous two examples that we looked at. And actually the change in vulnerability is very similar to Niska. So it's actually a 4% change from 30 to 34. So very similar levels of vulnerability. But we have 4,000 to almost 5,000 children there in those two waves. And then when we look at the critical difference here, we see 1. And we have a change of 4. So we may have a critical increase in vulnerability, but this is a particularly interesting case. And this is something that we're working on here at HELP, and I guess that's why this is a great example. We're still trying to decide if there is a minimum critical difference. So this calculator is using the curve, so as population size increases, the difference will, decrease approaching 0. But there has been discussion that maybe, say, 2% might be a cap on, the minimum amount of change that we would need to see. And so it's slightly open to interpretation. Do you have any thoughts to weigh in on that, Barry? Or?
Yeah, well, I do. Well, I think that the key is not to always just think in terms of the vulnerability rates, but also to think in terms of the number of children involved. So for instance, here in Surrey, in this example, the percentage of children who are vulnerable has gone up by 4%. Well, given that the average population is about 4,500, 1% of that is about 45 children, 4% is about 180 children. So that vulnerability has gone up. The number of children who are vulnerable has gone up by about 180 children in the whole school district of Surrey. So you should start thinking about, about the numbers only in terms of the local context. If you may want, for instance, if you're going to think of doing something new, to think of critical difference in terms of having a minimum of 2, is then you would actually have, you'd be thinking in terms of acting, even if there were, even if there were fewer children, is that right? Mm-hmm. Who are vulnerable. Mm-hmm. So at some point, we don't want to get to a point where, for instance, in all of Canada, we're saying that we have successfully reduced the vulnerability rate from 33.3 to 33.2. It just seems too small to be of any kind of real meaningfulness. So this is why we're thinking of critical difference, calling something meaningful if the critical difference is it's 2 or larger.
Mm-hmm. So at this point, it's kind of the important idea that we sort of have the calculator and we have the equation for critical difference, but it's important to evaluate your local context and your sort of reason for believing that what change is meaningful to you. So it's not kind of, full stop, here is critical difference or not. You kind of need to look at it from your local context and from sort of a theory of change to see why you would think so. So there's more to it than just math.
I think that's a great point to bring up, Jay, because I'm sure many of our participants in the webinar are thinking themselves in our community, the decisions that are made around resources, around planning, they're informed certainly by other metrics, by other data, by other research, by things like funding and resources available. So there are so many other factors, but I think our focus today is certainly to say, when we are looking at this EDI data, when we're seeing changes, when do we really need to maybe sit upright and see this as a significant shift in one direction or another, and how that can maybe clarify and support the anecdotal understandings we have about neighborhoods or parts of our community, and just to give a bit more, some more significant support to our planning ideas.
Well, and another good point about interventions and looking at critical differences are that here we're discussing vulnerabilities. So we're discussing children, as Barry explained at the beginning, who are below that cutoff on EDI scores. So we're not really looking at all the children that are above that cutoff. So an intervention could actually be taking action on the population grouping above the cutoff, and you wouldn't really see a shift in the number of vulnerable kids.
Right, so you're talking about a more universal support rather than a targeted intervention program.
Exactly. So so if something were universal, it could be affecting parts of the population and not others, and interventions differentially could affect a population. So we wouldn't always see this as well. So that's something to keep in mind.
Thanks.
So I have one more thing to show you guys. You can get here by going to Maps and Data and then Neighborhood. And I'm just going to use Vancouver because that's where we are right now presenting to you. And this is the Vancouver School District Neighborhood Data page. And there's this interactive map that you may have seen before that allows you to see EDI results. But right here is a critical difference map. And this is a new tool we've been working on. And let's see here, just going to scroll down so you can all see it. And what this lets us do is look at neighborhood level critical differences through time for a particular school district, and also looking at different scales. So right now we're looking at wave 2 to 5, and we're at 1 or more scales for physical vulnerability, social, emotional, language, communication. So, here's an interesting pattern where it seems from wave 2 to 5, things have actually been improving on the communication scale. That's what the green means. So green means a decrease in vulnerability, so that's a good thing. And the red is an increase in vulnerability. The light gray is a place where we have no critically different change, and the dark gray up here is no data. Barry has something he wants to say.
No. So, yeah, so this, again, it has to do with whether the change over time was larger than the critical difference in one direction or the other, in this case for Vancouver.
So another part to note, you can hover over a neighborhood and it will pop up with the name right below it. You can see in kind of yellow. And then up on the far side, when I move, I can't show you. I wish I could point with 2 mice. So up on the right side, you can see that it also has the neighborhood name that changes from Canby Riley Park to Mount Pleasant. And then we also have a nice little table, and that shows you the actual population counts and the wave and the percentage vulnerable, and it shows you the change. So it kind of does a lot of what the calculator is doing, but without you having to punch in any numbers. And you can it's a really great way to explore how critical difference works. And so you can also go up here and change the wave. And you'll note that it only goes in one direction. So you always compare from the earliest year, which is your base wave, to your later year. So there's from wave 2. Oops.
And so I'm sure for many of our participants today who are maybe not as technologically inclined as you, Jay, this certainly seems like a more direct route to be able to show that critical, that critical difference in a visual way to certainly to a room of stakeholders who may not have the technical background. So these maps are available for all communities?
Yes.
And the process for generating them, how does that proceed?
So they're all made. They're all on our website. And they just go to their regular neighborhood data page, and as I showed before, and then they can click on critical difference map. So a couple features that are here, I know often people want to download maps because they might be in a meeting where they don't have access to the internet. All you need to do is go to this page before your meeting when you do have the internet and load it up. And then everything's here. This will work fully offline. So there's no need to have internet access once you load it. So you just need to load it once, keep your window open, and then you can go to a meeting and this will work actually offline. So it's a great way that you don't need internet access.
So just to review, certainly what Barry was explaining to us is what's the background and the process for figuring out yourself and understanding the process, but here we have the actual application of it and the visual representation for when you just want to be getting to the final, the piece of information that perhaps stakeholders are more interested in themselves about where is the change happened and how. Great.
Exactly.
And to get a visual sense of some patterns and stuff like that. So it's a way to explore the data, basically. Yeah.
Great.
And do we have any questions remaining? Or? I think I'm finished. I think we'll have Amy come and wrap up, or
I think
is gonna,
as we're getting to the end of our time here, we've just about finished our hour. Certainly there have been other questions that have come up, and if you still have some questions remaining, you might want to send those in right now. But I think a lot of what we've been hearing is how a lot of this critical difference discussion, there's certainly an amount of complexity to it when we look at what are these changes and are they meaningful or not. But what we've been seeing is the demystification of how this is figured out, and as Barry's example gave a great understanding of how with these larger numbers that critical difference can be both better understood and the difference is more reliable with those larger numbers. So I guess if we're not seeing any further questions, I think we will we'll turn it back over to conclude our discussion. I guess of significance, there's certainly some questions that are more particular, and those will be followed up by the staff here at HELP. If you have particular questions just generally about working with the EDI in your community development work, I can certainly be contacted in regard to those more community development related issues in terms of working with school districts and early years councils. And then, as I mentioned, the more technical questions will be answered and dealt with by the great team here at HELP. So I'll pass it over for our wrapping up comments.
Thank you, Joseph. Thank you to Barry and Jay for the very informative discussion point today. As you can see on your screen, I've listed all the contact information. Should you have any further questions or more specific questions to your community, Barry, Jay, and Joseph would be happy to follow up with you following. Also, we've had a lot of interest in this webinar, and thank you so much for that. As you can see, we're at full house. Now on your screen, you can see the upcoming webinar dates for this particular series. We're very excited about some of the topics that we're covering. We are doing individual registration for each webinar, so stay tuned for that information. It will come through as Success by 6, through HELP on our mailing list. If you're not on that list, I recommend that you join that list, and also through any HELP social media channels you may be following, Twitter and Facebook. And that is the end, so thank you so much, everyone, and we look forward to seeing you in late February for the next webinar.